I was thinking about what would be most helpful to start sharing around building an aligned career in life. And one of the big things that came up for me was the external scorecard versus internal scorecard. I really want to dive into a little bit more as we're assessing career opportunities. What are we really assessing them against? And oftentimes that can happen without us realizing, like when I'm looking for a new role or I'm looking to pivot somehow, we do oftentimes assess them against what I call an external scorecard, but a lot of the times we don't pay much attention to the internal scorecard. So that's the topic of today. Really want to help people understand the difference between external versus internal and how to make more aligned decisions along the way. The external scorecard is the one that we're handed by our parents, by our culture, society, even our LinkedIn feeds. And it looks a lot like this: stable job in a stable industry, a title that sounds impressive, a salary that justifies the amount of time that you've put into all the work in school that you've done, a clear upward trajectory or growth, benefits, pension, security. And there's nothing wrong with those things per se, but the problem is that a lot of people end up chasing those things over 10, 15, 20 years, and they check those boxes before they even begin to think about what their own boxes are within. I see this all the time with clients. Take, for example, a lawyer who has worked their way up in position and salary, they're in the right industry, they have a secure job, and their title is pretty impressive. But the biggest thing I see is they show up and they say, this job and this life and what I've worked for doesn't even feel like it's mine. And it's the biggest signal that they've been measuring success and everything they've worked hard towards against this external scorecard, not their internal one. And as hard as it is to chase the benefits and results of an external scorecard, if you really look at it, it's pretty easy because it's tangible. Other people can see it, and it feels like evidence that in the context of society, you're doing okay. Now, the internal scorecard, on the other hand, that's the hard one. It's super personal. We don't have a lot of external feedback of what it should be, what we should be marking against that scorecard. It doesn't show up on a resume. And along our lives and our careers, we're never really asked to build one. And there's always a moment where we realize that the external scorecard we've been keeping up with all along just isn't right anymore. It doesn't always look like the same sign, but there's always at least one. For example, you get that promotion that you've been working super hard for, your boss tells you that you got it, and you just don't really feel anything inside when they tell you. For some people, it's a work anniversary. You've been at the firm for 5 years, you're being celebrated, but just doesn't even feel like it matters. For others, it's that Sunday night dread that we now call Sunday scaries, where you feel anxious and scared about starting the work week, something that's been going along so long that you barely even think anything of it anymore. It's in those moments where you feel like you're hitting a plateau, or you have this achievement that really feels like it lands flat, or moments of values misalignment where you might start to realize, what am I even measuring all of this for in the end? Back in the early days of my career, I did not have this term for internal scorecard. I knew at the time that something wasn't adding up by meeting all these external milestones that I was meeting in my career, but I didn't quite understand why that didn't feel right and what would feel right instead. After graduating university, I landed a role at the Big Four. And that was sort of like the expected path outside of university in the accounting finance realm. The pay wasn't great at that time, but what was great was the security that a job like that offered. My whole life, when I envisioned my entry into my career, it would be exactly that: safe, secure, maybe not the highest pay, but a really great beginning for me on my path. My external scorecard was happy. There was an amazing company, check, that was reputable, that would look good on my resume. There was exposure to people that could help me take my career really far later on. There were lavish clients that I was working on. And of course, a paid CPA program. And it made sense for a while to me. That was pretty much the only option coming out of university. It was the safe path to follow. And everyone around me was also doing something similar. So it made me not really question it at the time. And I say all of this keeping in mind that I still believe that it was the right direction for me, especially early on in my career. But had I had an internal scorecard or understanding of what that means and how to build one at the time, it would have made some transitions out of that initial role and onto other things much easier, much more seamless, much clearer on what that next direction was supposed to be for me. Because when you're not feeling in alignment and you're in the thing that you're doing, it feels really heavy and draining. And if I had that perspective on why I was doing that role at the time and how it did fit into my internal scorecard and where maybe some areas were not being met yet, but seeing how those could be met later on by having this experience as a foundation, that would have felt a lot lighter. In my own journey, I got exposure to a lot of self development books that slowly helped me chip away at what those feelings were, why I was feeling them, and then navigating what would help shift them. And that's where I landed on some exercises for getting very clear on your values. That was one of the first eye opening moments for me of, right, maybe there's like some additional factors here that I should be taking into consideration when I'm driving the direction of my career, when I'm making decisions, when I'm planning on where I want to grow next. I should be taking into consideration all these things that are happening internally too, because it just doesn't feel right to only look at the external and what that provides me. And over time, I sort of unknowingly started shaping this internal scorecard of different categories that matter to me, and I found also matter to the clients that I eventually started coaching around this too. And they're not just conditions that check the boxes in terms of a professional standpoint. They also make sure that they check the boxes from a personal standpoint. As we all know, those are two very integrated things. And so that's why I really want to share with you more about the internal scorecard today and get you thinking more about it. So, the first condition to pay attention to on the internal scorecard is values. This is what you need your work to stand for and align with. Values like integrity, community, creativity, impact, autonomy, freedom. Mapping out what your top 5 values are as a start is really helpful to understand what it is you actually care about so that when you're out there looking for work to match up to that, you can assess it right against those 5 values. And if 5 feels too many at first, start with 3. You can also look up example values online just to get an idea of what some of those are. You know, for some, it can even be family. And that's a really broad term, but if you know that that's one of your top 5 values, then the work that you're looking for is probably going to be best if it incorporates the ability to pay enough attention to your family. So, roles that support a little bit more work life balance, for example. The second condition is energy. This is all about identifying what the tasks are, what the environment is that fills your cup day to day. So, you really want to start paying attention to, in your existing environment and role, what activities leave you feeling super drained, super tired, and then what tasks and environments leave you feeling super energized, leave you feeling like you want more of that tomorrow when you go back. That's one of the biggest signals that something energizes you versus drains you. One of the things that I recognize for myself, and I can't even say I had this figured out a few years ago when I became a coach. It actually happened over the past year. Is I realized how important in-person connection was for me. When I'm operating remotely completely online, there's a part of that that meets autonomy, but then there's a really big part that feels draining because it's so isolating. When I'm around people and I'm in person and I'm able to collaborate or even have that 2 minute conversation somewhere outside in a cafe, I leave feeling more energized. I go home later that day. The more interactions I've had with people in person, I would say the more energy that I get fueled by. And I wake up the next day wanting to do the same thing. The third condition is identity. And this is all about who you need to feel like you're becoming through your work. A really common place to find this is, who do you look up to? When you think about someone who is living your ideal version of a life and a career or anything in between, who is that person? What is their everyday like? What is their identity? Do they have a family? Do they work as an executive, 60-hour weeks? Do they have their own business? Are they helping people? Are they teaching people? Are they behind the scenes and more data driven? Those little bits of identity that you see in people that you look up to are key pieces for what you truly want inside. Again, not what society tells you, but what you want. And when you're thinking about the work that you do, does it get you a step closer to being like that person that you look up to? And this person could be someone you actually know in real life, or it could be someone that you've seen online. It doesn't really matter if you know them personally, it's just all about understanding these key characteristics about them that you see them living out in their identity, and whether or not you also feel drawn to that. Now, if your work doesn't reflect that identity, or it doesn't feel like it builds towards that identity, that could also be a signal that you could go and form or work towards that identity outside of work too. So that could be through volunteer, it could be through starting a side passion or a side business, something that gets you feeling like you are able to start building towards that identity in a small way. And again, it doesn't mean that you need to become that person overnight. It's really just meant to be a signal for what truly matters to you inside. And if you do things that build towards that, they will naturally lead to more fulfillment. The fourth condition is meaning. And this is one that people often get pretty tripped up by. It's all about what your why is underneath everything that you do. So, what is the reason that you actually get out of bed every day to go to work? I know what you're thinking. Well, of course, I'm doing it to afford my lifestyle or make money. Great. That's good awareness. That means that you're aware of why you need to be getting up every day and going through the day to day of maybe even the line of work that you don't enjoy as much. Sometimes getting clarity on that and seeing that bigger picture of what it contributes to can help with the fulfillment. But the goal with this condition of the scorecard is also to try to dig a little bit deeper and beyond that base level of security and making income. Is there anything else in there that is your deeper why? Is there someone that the company that you work at helps in the end? Who's that end consumer that the impact is being made upon? How does your work keep the wheels turning in the world in some way? Doesn't have to be this huge why and purpose to, solve famine in the world, although that is an amazing mission to have and a great why. But it doesn't mean it needs to be something that big. It can be smaller than that. It can be, if you're an accountant, I'm processing the invoices and the paperwork and documenting everything in the financials so that investors can then make educated decisions about where to take this company and help our end user. No matter where that meaning comes from, whether it is the impact of the customers that you're working for, the clients you're working for, or just simply reasons in your own life that you are doing the work for, identifying it can help you feel so much more connected between work and life. I really challenge you to try to find your own mini why. It doesn't have to be the big why, but mini why in the work that you're doing right now. It is one of the most challenging conditions to figure out on the internal scorecard, but it's also one that can shift things the most. And the fifth one is environment. These are the practical things that need to be in place for you to be able to do your best work and best contribution. Think about really the environment it takes for you to thrive. Is that in a leadership type environment where you are the leader leading other people? Is that in a place of independence where you're able to be by yourself in a room, heads down on the computer, getting your stuff done? Or is it an environment of flexibility where you are able to, let's say, choose your own hours, choose what you do at what time and how you do it? Maybe it's collaboration, being around like minded people in a room where you're able to brainstorm, to come up with solutions and problem solve, not alone, but together. Most people have a vague sense of all of these conditions, but they haven't made them explicit or specific enough. When they're not explicit or specific, we're not able to use them to guide us. What happens is you end up drifting towards opportunities that show up that look really good on the outside. They're super safe, they're super secure. Grandma loves the idea of that opportunity. What you end up doing is using a combination of everyone else's compass but your own. And here's the thing about internal scorecards. They don't change as fast as your external circumstances do. Your job can change, your company can change, your title can change. But if you're clear on what your internal scorecard is and what feels like alignment to you, you can use that to take or leave or choose opportunities that do end up coming your way. You can evaluate every opportunity that comes your way against it. And it's no longer a question of, does this resonate or does it not? Is it the right fit? Am I making the right choice? It becomes very clear when you assess it against these five conditions. If you feel called to do so, I invite you to open up a notebook, open up the Notes app maybe on your phone, and start going through these five different conditions and noting down what you do currently have data on about yourself under each of these categories. See what might initially come up. You don't have to have the answer for every single one of these right now, but starting to get clarity on what you do know will already bring you 50, 60, 70% closer to being able to figure out what that next step might be for you that makes sense when looking at your internal scorecard, and also using it to start assessing opportunities and things that might be coming along the way in your life and career. And for the stuff that you might not know yet or might not have clarity on yet, it's okay. What we're doing now is also planting a seed so that when you go about your every day to day responsibilities and role at work, you can start noticing what were those things that really drain me by the end of the day that I am not a big fan of? And maybe what were those environments that I felt I really thrived in and I did my best work in? One of the greatest reviews of the internal scorecard that one of my clients gave is that it made them feel indisruptible. When they had clarity of those five different conditions and what opportunities would fill those and which would not, they could literally go out into the world and be indisruptible because they would make sure that they landed in something that checked all the boxes. And even if they had to land on something that checked, let's say, only 70 or 80% of them, they were clear on that. They knew that they were going in with, maybe condition number five wasn't met. Maybe this value wasn't 100% met. But it's okay. It checks the boxes on a lot of different ones. And it means that in the next opportunity, there will be room for even more alignment and fulfillment because they'll be focusing on taking on something that checks even more of those boxes. I really want to make sure that these solo episodes feel like you can take away a practical strategy or a next step that you can do to implement the frameworks and the tools that I share. So, with that being said, I wanted to give you a few questions to sit with over the next week after you finish this episode. And the key with these questions is not to overthink the answer, but just to simply observe what first comes up for you when you hear that question. Feel free to pause this video or audio after you hear each question to give yourself a couple minutes to reflect, or take it as a journaling exercise afterwards. First question: in the past year of work, where did you feel most like yourself? What were you doing? Who were you with? What problem were you trying to solve? Second question: what would your work have to look like for you to feel like you're in the right place? Not the perfect place, just the right place for you and for your values. Observe what comes up, even if it feels really vague or impossible right now. The key is just to get an answer to what those values might be and how they would show up in your work. And last question: if your job title disappeared tomorrow, your company just went away, your industry changed, if everything externally shifted, who do you still want to be at the other side of that? What do you want to be able to say is still true about you? The answer to that question is your internal scorecard talking. And remember, the external scorecard will always be there. There will always be people in society telling you what to do. The world will keep giving you metrics to measure yourself against. But the real work is building your own measuring system, knowing what's on that internal scorecard so you can start using it to make aligned decisions. I hope this episode helps you get started on that journey yourself. If today's episode landed for you, feel free to share it with someone who you think might need it too. And if you're in the middle of figuring out your internal scorecard right now, find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify. I am always happy to connect with anyone that wants more help in navigating this type of work. And I genuinely want to know what came up for you. See you next week. Keep making it work.